walk your talk. Lead with moral authority. While he was shutting down businesses, while he was shutting down people, while he was asking people to, or requiring people to use masks and setting curfews, opposite to what he was telling the population, he was out having extravagant dinners on your and my taxpayers' dollars. And then it got to a point where there was irrefutable video evidence that he was actually out in restaurants, out in dinners, not wearing a mask, doing the exact opposite of what he was asking everyone else to do. And what I can tell you in that moment of time, this is where I lost all respect as a leader and also as a man as well.
Remember, adversity is your advantage.
Hey friends, welcome back to the show. This episode is a solo episode. We're going to be going through the 5 leadership lessons from COVID-19, which, if you can believe, it's its 5-year anniversary from showing its ugly face on this planet, which is crazy to me, a half a decade. So I want to take some time to do a solo episode to reflect back on 5 leadership lessons that I learned through the process, with the goal of adding more value to you so you can apply these leadership to your life to create more income and impact. Now, before I go through those, I want to give you a gift. I create a free leadership course for you if you want to go to my website, brycehenson.com/leadership, and there you go. So I'm going to give you the overview and the 5 lessons, but I'm also going to give you a little data. I'm going to kick it off with a story, at least my perspective, and you have your perspective on COVID. But for me, the first time I heard of COVID-19 was January 2020, and I heard it through a friend who does business in China. That was the first time it got put on my radar. And then in February, through media, things started to get a little weird, as we all know. And then in mid-March, as mid-March was arriving, things were changing with a hurry. And we got word here in Southern California on Sunday, March 15th, that the city of Los Angeles, the mayor, was closing things down. So Bedros Keuilian, my business partner, founder of Fit Body Bootcamp, who was the CEO at the time, I was the vice president at the time, ended up sending a text message to all the leadership team, calling an all hands on deck meeting first thing Monday morning on Monday, March 16th. Now, at that time, we met as a leadership team on Tuesday, so this was a bit preemptive. Now, in that meeting, if you can believe, it was actually eerily calm. We had most of our leadership team has shifted, since that period of time. But we were all seasoned as we were there, as we are now as well. But it was a really good meeting. But yes, there was nerves, and you could probably feel that to some extent. But for the vast majority of the meeting, we were cool, calm, and collected. In fact, we were joking and having fun. We were probably just releasing some of that nervous energy. But I think that's a good leadership lesson in its own right, especially when chaos is about you. Keep your wits, be cool, calm, and collected. And because of that, it really helped us navigate through COVID. And, a lot of industries were thrashed, including the restaurant industry, including the gym industry, which I'm a franchisor of Fit Body Bootcamp. So it certainly wasn't kind, but without a strong leadership and the strong support from our franchise partners, we would not have been able to make it. So that is a really big learning lesson throughout that process. Now, as an outcome of that meeting, we decided to proactively recommend our franchise partners to close down their doors for 14 days to flatten the curve. You guessed it. But we all know how that landed. And then a few days later, the mandate came from our governor, in addition to all the governors throughout the course of the United States of America, and many throughout the world as well, to shut down. Not all, but many. So that was the proactive approach that we took. And then, as they say, the rest is history. Now, before I hit some data here, I think it's also important. You hear this from time to time. Well, COVID caused this, COVID caused that. I'm going to take a step back and put the brakes on that, because the reality of the situation, COVID didn't cause anything. It's the government's reaction, the politicians' reactions, the media reaction that actually was the foundation for a lot of the chaos that ensued. It's kind of like if you're in leadership and you have a teammate who arrives late and they're like, hey, I'm so sorry I arrived 15, 20 minutes late because of the traffic. Well, no, the traffic was there. The fact of the matter is that you arrived late because you failed to plan for the traffic. It wasn't the traffic's fault. So I think that's a really important message and mindset frame for all of us. COVID didn't cause anything. It was the poor reaction from our politicians, from our government, from our leaders, if you will, and from the media that really caused all this chaos. But that all in mind, before we go into lessons, I always like to put some things in perspective to be able to add more value to you, to put some data data out there so that way we have a good understanding of what we're looking at. So I pulled some data on financial impact, fitness and weight impact, being in the fitness industry, deaths, sadly, the gym industry impact, and then the impact in the economy via inflation. So from a financial impact from the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis, by the end of 2023, estimates pegged that the total U.S. economic cost was around $14 trillion with a T, factoring in outputs like loss of workforce, collapse retail, and then the health-related hits. Now, to put that in perspective for a family of four, that's roughly losing about 200 grand on average. So these numbers are wow, $14 trillion of impact. Now, from a fitness perspective, being I'm a fitness guy, and certainly from a COVID lens, the most people that were severely impacted were either the elderly or people that had pre-existing conditions, that had disease already, and that were obese. Diving in, one analysis of over 4 million adults' health records by the American Psychological Association found that about 39% gained weight from March 2020 to March 2021. And another 2021 survey pegged 42% of U.S. adults reported an unwanted weight gain of average of 29 pounds, which is crushing because the people that got hurt the most were overweight or obese. Because let's face it, when you're overweight and you're obese, your body, your organs, everything in your body has to work harder. And then when you have additional pressure, whether it's COVID or the flu or any virus for that matter, it causes complications. Now, speaking of complications, sadly, people died. And I think two things can be true. Certainly, COVID is a real virus. It impacted a lot of negativity. But also the second truth is the response of COVID was clearly not in the right proportion. But specific to the deaths, which was this data is pulled from the National Center of Health Statistics for the U.S. here in the United States, official count pegs the number around 1.2 million deaths by the late 2023, so about 3 years into COVID. When you break that down, that's about 400,000 people died per year. To put that in perspective, in 2021, just under 200,000 people lost their lives because of alcohol. So when I look at this, COVID was about twice as deadly as alcohol, which is abundant and around us all. The next piece of data I want to dive into is the gym industry, being the industry that I serve. And from the Health and Fitness Association, the U.S. saw 1.4 million fitness jobs vanish. This goes from coaches and service people and front desk administration. Major fitness brands went bankrupt. And this thrashed not only the fitness industry, but the retail industry. And people lost their businesses, their life savings. And speaking from a personal perspective, my franchise contracted significantly, just like many did, especially in the states like California, New York, New Jersey, Michigan, who had horrible policies put down from their governor and their government officials. And the last piece of data I want to pull out is inflation. And this data is cited from the New York Times and Forbes. Let's face it, as we all know, government responses piled on the debt to the tune here in the United States of $4 trillion in stimulus. Think CARES Act pushing the federal debt to 100% of GDP by the year 2021. This crushed the economy. This also crushed the poor and middle class, which is crazy. It was designed to help them, which unfortunately did not, because inflation is a hidden tax in the more poor and middle class. It actually affects the rich the least. Think about it. If you're wealthy, if you have properties, if you have assets, they actually went up in pricing. They went up in value because of the amount of money pushed in the economy. Now, it didn't happen at first. For the first year or two, it actually helped the people and the low end, if you will, that were receiving these stimulus checks. But just like someone who ingests heroin, you feel great at the beginning, but then eventually what happens is that passes and you're left with withdrawal. And we faced it, and we're currently facing it right now, which has been really challenging. 2024, from an inflationary perspective, the economy contracted. So this is things that we're still dealing with today. And I look at it as if you went to the doctor and you had something happen to your leg, you broke your leg. Well, our politicians, our government, what they did is instead of like getting a cast to fix your leg, they're just like, hey, we're going to amputate it. And that was really a good analogy of the response of COVID, not COVID itself. So that all said, that's some data to put things in perspective. We're going to get to it. We're going to go through the 5 leadership lessons that I derived and some call to action as well. So the first leadership lesson that was really reinforced throughout COVID is your health is everything. And the good news is you have the power to shape it. The tragedy of the situation is the biggest victims of COVID, to reinforce, were people who did not take care of themselves. They were elderly, of course, part of them, and certainly there's no issue there. But more common than not, people with pre-existing health conditions, people that had disease or obesity. 80% of our population here in the United States of America is either overweight or obese, and this actually crushed that specific demographic and population. So that's sad on one hand, but the enlightening message, the leadership message, is you have the power to be proactive against your health. Because just like in 2020, right now, if you're obese, if you're overweight, if you're not taking care of yourself, guess what? You're a sitting duck now, just like you were 5 years ago, because guess what? Another virus is going to come. Some other disease is going to come. So the call to action, my passionate plea, I hope you learned this. If you didn't, my call to action is to get in shape, clean up your diet. All right, get sleep, take care of yourself. This is extremely important. You want to be proactive, not reactive. And if you need help, that's okay. Hire a fitness coach for more accountability and guidance. I certainly did that when I started my fitness transformation journey back in 2007. And my strong recommendation is for you to do the same. Lesson number 2, the herd mentality. Humans transfer emotion so easy. And if you look back at human nature, we've been evolving on this planet for millions of years. And far before language, we used to communicate through emotion. This is so important because there's studies out there saying that just a very small percentage of your communication is through the words that you say. It's the emotion on how you communicate. People are really, really good at sensing things. Now, someone could say something, but if their body language, if they're emitting a different sense, like fear or nerves, you can sense that and you can pick that up very easily. And what we saw is fear was pushed out by our politicians. Fear was pushed out by our governments. Fear was pushed out by the media outlets, which caused a lot of panic and fear. And, when I look back during that period of COVID, like through the thick of it, there was just an element of fear. And in business, there is a framework from a sales and leadership perspective called urgency and scarcity. Scarcity, COVID is going to kill you. Your life is scarce. All right. Urgency, take the vaccine now or you're going to die. All right, urgency and scarcity, they can be tools of influence in the positive way. They can also be tools of influence in the negative way. So this is real, and this is something that I learned and was reinforced for me. So my call to action, the lesson that I want you to derive, is next time someone comes up in a panic or a group of people are in a panic, hey, Bryce, this, that, and the other, this is a huge deal. Instead of just getting all emotional with them, take a step back from a good leadership perspective. Take a deep breath. Actually logically analyze, is this really a good deal? Or are you going to fall prey to an emotional output from someone else? And sometimes it is a big deal, but you have to understand, you have to discern that. And I think it's just important to understand, just because someone else thinks it's a big deal does not mean that's the case. And you don't want to fall victim to them transferring negative emotion to you, which is what happened during COVID, in a big lesson throughout this process. Leadership lesson number 3, question everything, which is the basis of good leadership. It's also the basis of the scientific method. And when you look at the scientific method, just like good leadership, questions everything. Scientific method in good leadership does not jump to conclusions, does not make assumptions. Well, guess what? And I don't like to talk in absolutes, but by and large, the scientific community did not do this. And specifically, the figurehead for the scientific community, a gentleman named Dr. Fauci, completely failed us, completely jumped to conclusions, completely made assumptions, and it hurt a lot of people in the process. What would have been a better leadership move in the absence of knowledge, it's okay to say, hey, I don't know. I need to find out more information. We need to inquire more. We need to learn more before jumping to conclusions, before making assumptions, and before making bad directives that were created, like the 6 feet rule that was found out later for no apparent reason, or at least not founded on science. So the call to action, what I learned in this process, just like the scientific method, question science does not or ask questions, does not make assumptions. That's strong leadership as well. So your call to action around this lesson is, as a leader, remain cool, calm, and collected. Do not make assumptions. Do not overact. Instead, ask questions, get curious. And if you don't know, it's okay. Say you don't know, but you're going to find out the answer and you'll be back back in touch when you do. If our politicians, and specifically Dr. Fauci and many scientists, I shouldn't talk in absolutes, there was a lot of awesome scientists out there asking questions, doing the work that really helped. But by and large, and specifically from at least the government perspective from our scientific community, big leadership fail. And the call to action here is for you not to make that same mistake in your leadership. Leadership lesson number 4, strong leaders, I should say, have moral authority, meaning they walk their own talk. And here I'm going to go irate and use a poor example of leadership by the governor of my great state of California, a gentleman named Mr. Newsom. And he did the exact opposite of this, okay? While he was shutting down businesses, while he was shutting down people, while he was asking people to, or requiring people to use masks and setting curfews, opposite to what he was telling the population, he was out having extravagant dinners on your and my taxpayers' dollars. And then, as it turns out, when he was found out, he lied about it. He lied about it multiple times until it got to a point where there was irrefutable video evidence that he was actually out in restaurants, out in dinners, not wearing a mask, doing the exact opposite of what he was asking everyone else to do. And what I can tell you in that moment of time, this is where I lost all respect for the man as a leader and also as a man as well. And my call to action, the big learning lesson throughout this process is walk your talk. Lead with moral authority. And that's extremely important leadership. And I'll use a couple examples of this. If you're a dentist and you have bad, missing, or crooked teeth, well, then guess what? That's not a really good leadership move, and your business is going to fail. If you're in the fitness industry and you have a lot of weight to lose, well, guess what? That's not going to serve you well in your business. So you must walk your own talk. You must practice what you preach. This is called moral authority, and it's good leadership for that matter. So my humble ask, my passionate plea is to walk your own talk as a leader and live through moral authority. And leadership lesson number 5, leadership's debrief. They reflect and they apologize when they make mistakes. And the content, this particular episode today, is to add more value to you. It's also an exercise for me in reflection, in debriefing, and also too, just taking things in proper perspective. And good leadership does this. And I think that's really important in the process. And also too, good leadership, when you make a mistake, owns that mistake, accepts that mistake, and communicates, hey, I made a mistake, but this is the course of action we're going to do to account and make up for that mistake. And over the last, bit of time here since COVID, there's been a lot of studies that have been showing this. The American people have lost so much credibility and trust with our government, with our politicians, and with the media for that matter. And this could all been avoided by, doing the work we just talked about with the previous lessons. But the biggest thing is that when it became very obvious that there was people jumping to conclusions that politicians were making mandates that were not in the best interest of the population. When it came to that conclusion, because let's face it, when you look back at the early days of COVID, there was a lot of confusion, there was a lot of unknowns, and that's okay. But as a leader, when you make a mistake, own that mistake. And we as the American people would have gained a lot more trust with our politicians, with our media, with the government. If our government officials, with our politicians, the media could say, hey, listen, we messed up. We screwed up, we jumped to conclusions, we made assumptions, we gave bad direction. But the fact of the matter, that has not happened. And that's really been the source, the foundation for that broken trust. But it's a learning lesson, and it's an opportunity for you as a leader. So it's okay, you're going to make mistakes. You're going to have mess ups. That's just part of being a leader. That's part of being human. But when you do, reflect, debrief, analyze, and then own it. Own up to those mistakes. And I can tell you, your leadership will benefit from that. So this all, my friends, I know I promised you 5 leadership lessons, but I'm going to over-deliver today, and I'm going to give you a 6th as a bonus. And the 6th leadership lesson that I derived from this entire experience is, as a leader, good leadership, trust their gut. And let's face it, this was a good learning lesson for me in the process. And I'm going to talk about the vaccine for a little bit here. And generally speaking, I support vaccines. They've been, very, very beneficial to human prosperity by and large, right? But it became to be very clear that things got really wonky with how the situation was communicated, how the situation was mismanaged, and they were pushing this so hard when things weren't adding up. And it's interesting now, as everything has come to tune, Mark Zuckerberg recently got on with Joe Rogan and communicated how the last presidential administration was putting crazy pressure on Meta to censor real information around the negative sides of the vaccine, which is freaking crazy and bonkers. And let's face it, I think we could all sense it, not at first, not in March, but as the months started to roll on, especially as year one rolled on in 2021 and 2022, like you could get a good sense that things were not adding up and, not a good situation. So, I mean, one, when I look back at that, shame on you, presidential administration underneath the Biden administration, and shame on you, Dr. Fauci, for sure. I had a friend who almost lost his life in his mid-40s because he took the vaccine. But that all said, that's part of this process and part of this particular message. But the whole point of the leadership lesson, and it's interesting, the conspiracy theories that were thrown out during COVID actually got to be proven. I don't like to talk in absolutes, but the vast majority just wait 3 to 6 months. And the learning lesson in this process as a leader, especially when you don't have all the information, because you'll never have all the information as a leader, but the learning lesson in the process is extract as much data as you possibly can, extract as much information as you possibly can, but trust your gut in the process. In good leadership, good leaders trust their gut. So my friends, that was your 6th bonus leadership lesson throughout this particular episode. And I hope you got a ton of value. I still cannot believe it's literally been 5 years, a half a decade since March of 2020 rolled through. But in my spirit in my quest of being a good leader of myself, my team, my community, my franchise system, the coaching programs that I run, and also of you as well, I want to take a step back, debrief, and really contemplate and share some of the learning lessons that I learned in the process in the hope that you can digest these and then take these with you and apply them in your leadership so you can grow your income when you grow your impact, which this is all about. So I hope you got a lot of value from this episode. Assuming you did, my biggest ask is like, subscribe, but drop your biggest comment, your biggest takeaway from this episode in the comment section. I would love to engage in a healthy conversation. And as always, remember, adversity is your advantage, and we'll see you in the next episode.